the tumultuous landscape of 2024, the world has witnessed a staggering transformation in military dynamics. These U.S. arms exports surged by 29%, reaching $318.7 billion. This increase was driven by escalating geopolitical tensions, notably the Ukraine conflict and Israel's military escalations in the Middle East. The surge positioned the U.S. as a central player in global military affairs. As countries scrambled to replenish arms sent to Ukraine, U.S. defense contractors profited amid rising instability. The increase also highlighted Washington's support for Israel, despite criticism over Gaza, and pressured NATO allies to increase defense spending. What does this growing arms race mean for the future of global security and the balance of power? I'm Henny Saif in this think tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
President Donald Trump's White House has instructed the U.S. military to lift a hold imposed by the Biden administration on the supply of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel. Sharq al-Awsat reported that the move was widely expected. Biden had imposed the hold on the delivery of these bombs due to concerns about their potential impact in Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza. A ceasefire to hold the war was recently agreed upon. The Biden administration's main concern had been the use of such large bombs in the city of Rafah, where more than 1 million Palestinians had taken refuge. Europe is facing its most significant crisis since the EU's formation, with a range of external and internal challenges threatening its unity and survival. The implications of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, along with economic stagnation and the growing influence of the US and China, are putting immense pressure on Europe. The Guardian stated that the European Union faces economic stagnation, high debt, and a declining workforce, compounded by rising hard-right populism. Leadership is fragmented, with Macron and Scholz struggling and the EU Commission lacking influence. Ukraine's Zelensky urges Europe to become self-reliant in defense and energy. Tensions with the US, driven by Trump's policies, threaten Europe's trade, security, and values.
U.S. arms exports surged to a record $318.7 billion in 2024, marking a 29% increase, accompanied by significant implications for global tensions, particularly in the Middle East and the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. According to the United States State Department, this rise stems from nations replenishing military stockpiles after supplying arms to Ukraine and preparing for potential large-scale conflicts. This surge reflects a shift in United States foreign policy, where military equipment plays a pivotal role in shaping international security dynamics. Notable sales such as the $18.8 billion deal for the F-15 jets to Israel underscore the United States' position as a leading arms supplier amid escalating geopolitical instability. The demand for U.S. weaponry is primarily driven by the Russia-Ukraine conflict, prompting nations to bolster their defenses. In the Middle East, United States arms exports to Israel exacerbate tensions, particularly in light of Israel's actions in southern Lebanon and the West Bank. These shipments risk escalating regional confrontations, emboldening military strategies and fueling further instability. While these exports benefit United States defense manufacturers, they also contribute to an arms race amplifying global tensions. The Biden administration's final year signals a strategic pivot towards strengthening alliances through military support, a move that could have long-term consequences for international relations and conflict dynamics. As nations fortify their defenses, U.S. arms exports play a critical role in shaping global security, raising concerns about their potential to intensify existing conflicts or spark new ones.
In a world fraught with conflict, today's discussion delves into the surge in U.S. arms exports, exploring how military support shapes geopolitical tensions, influences international relations, and reflects a strategic agenda that links defense spending with global power dynamics. Joining us is Mr. Brent Sadler, a former Pentagon official from Washington, and Mr. Ashraf Al-Ashri, Al-Ahram newspaper managing editor from Cairo. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us here on Think Tank. Mr. Sadler, I'll start off with you now. What factors do you believe contributed most significantly to the 29% increase in U.S. arms exports in 2024?
Oh, thank you very much. In the United States, this is called security cooperation. And when this is done well, it can actually deter an outbreak of war. In the case of Ukraine, which I think the vast majority of that increase is responsible, it would have prevented or at least deterred the calculation by the Russians to launch the February 2022 invasion. But done poorly, we see the results of that. And now we're in a situation, the other side of security cooperation are arms sales to allies or like-minded countries, in this case, Ukraine, and that is to ensure that U.S. interests are best defended by a partner that's already engaged in a conflict. Right now, on the other side of the world, there's another large draw for U.S. security cooperation, ostensibly to deter another war in the Pacific, which would be much larger, deadly, and have global consequences far outstripping what we're seeing in Ukraine and the Middle East in the last several years. And that is the provision of warships and weapons to countries like treaty ally the Philippines, but also sales under favorable financing terms. Again, this is part of the security cooperation construct of the United States government to ensure that Taiwan has an adequate defense to prevent or deter a Chinese communist invasion of the island, which is a 80-year threat.
Mr. Ashri, how do you see the U.S. arms sales impacting or reflecting on geopolitical tensions, particularly in regions like the Middle East and Eastern Europe? Mr. Ashri, can you hear us, sir? We will try and get back to Mr. Ashri. Mr. Sadler, the current arms export strategy, how does it align with the broader U.S. foreign policy objectives? You've mentioned the nature of the cooperation, but how does it reflect, and what really foreign policy objectives are we going to see for 2025?
Well, it's a good question. It would be speculative to guess what the new administration that is still getting its people in place, what they actually will be able to accomplish. But what is clear with the selection of Undersecretary Bridge Colby at the Department of Defense and Senator Rubio to lead as the Secretary of State and Mike Waltz as the Senior Security Advisor to the President, there is very clear intent to focus most of that activity, military sales and security cooperation, to the Pacific region, because it is there where the threat is the largest from China. But there is decades-long history that has very unbalanced from what the United States' strategic interests are, but where it is spending its very scant resources in the security cooperation. Things like the Camp David Accords, that has a significant amount of money that goes to Egypt and to Israel to ensure a truce and security agreement that goes back decades remains in place.
Well, what about Eastern Europe? How do US allies, such as NATO members, respond to increasing pressure to allocate more resources to defense?
Well, back in President Obama's administration, that was where the NATO countries came together and agreed to spend 2% of their GDP. None of them actually really stepped up to that until President Trump began to name and shame and actually make some threats, some of them very explicit, that there would be a consequence of NATO partner countries not carrying their full share of the defense. But it really was Putin's invasion in February of 2022 that shocked the NATO countries to take action, most notably Germany, but Eastern European countries, again led by countries like Romania and Poland, have been on an upward trend of spending more on their defense and contributing thereby more to the collective security of the NATO writ large. But there's still much work to be done, and there is concern here in D.C. that once a treaty or a negotiated solution in Ukraine is sealed, that the pressure for countries like Spain, Italy, and France will be let up, and they'll go back to spending far too little on their outdated, antiquated, and in many cases, largely inadequate militaries.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined again by Mr. Ashraf Al-Ashri, the Al-Ahram newspaper managing editor from Cairo. Mr. Ashri, talking about the arms sales, the US arms sales increasing over 20% now. How are they impacting the geopolitical tensions? And we're focusing mainly now on the Middle East and Eastern Europe.
Greetings to you and to the viewers. Absolutely, such figures will lead to the continuing threat to the international order and the regional order as well, affecting the Middle East, which will worsen the conflicts and will lead to the sustainability of the vicious cycle of violence. Continuing the aggressions against neighboring countries, or the Israeli war on Gaza and Ramallah, and it enables the Iranian confrontation during the upcoming period, as the US is now supporting military operations regardless of any serious implications of these sales. The Pacific region and Russia and China as the sorry.
Well, Mr. Ashri, also speaking of major European economies, how do economic pressures in countries like Germany and France affect their defense spending?
When there are huge arms sales, such as in Germany, which is a huge economy in Europe, with a lot of arms spending, this will lead to continuing continuing the buys of German sales, worsening conflicts such as the Russian-Ukrainian situation. In addition to countries in the Middle East diversifying the sources of weapons, and they find the opportunity in the US and the European countries such as Germany, giving Israel a lot of advanced weapons. Such sales will achieve a lot of gains to those parties who seek the continuity of these conflicts, especially in Asia and in the Pacific, as well as the Middle East, as we find such countries, such powerful countries, making these sales and achieving a lot of revenue out of these sales, which will undermine the economic development in a lot of regions around the world, and the Middle East is the best example of that, as the economic development is being held back due to the ongoing conflicts.
Well, Mr. Sadler, other than the economic pressures, what are the political factors preventing NATO members from reaching the 5% GDP defense spending target?
Oh, thanks. Just to be clear, I think the current official target is 2% of GDP, but clearly President Trump has stated that it needs to go much higher. And there have been numerous NATO delegations that have come through DC that echoed the same thing based on their own independent security needs, that 2% is the floor. It is certainly not the ceiling and the end goal. But the political pressures, quite frankly, are driven by the security concerns that many Europeans are seeing right now at their doorstep. A war that has not been seen in this scale since World War II, and with refugees from Ukraine that have traveled throughout Europe. Again, this is also played out with the collapse of security in Syria, when you also had large numbers of refugees traveling into Europe, and it wakes up many Europeans that they live in a very dangerous world. And really the question before many of the political leaderships and the elections that we're seeing is that Europeans are having to make a choice, give up very favorable social programs for security that they've allowed to lapse and neglect for far too long. And I think you're seeing with more conservative and common sense governments that are coming to power across Europe that you're going to see a more balanced approach to security, economic development, and perhaps a reprioritization of too favorable, in many cases, social programs.
Mr. Ashri, now with a spike of arms sales and exports in 2024 by the US, 29%, how do you assess the potential risks of the escalating arms sales amid the existing conflicts such as the Israeli war in Gaza, Lebanon, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, with all the ceasefire agreements that are meant to be held, all the humanitarian catastrophes as well?
Absolutely, we cannot expect anything positive with Trump in the White House. I think there will be a fast pace of heightening arms sales, as Trump is a man of deals. There will be casualties in the Middle East and in the conflict areas as he's building the military complex, gaining more revenue, more funds. So he will seek to apply pressures on the regional countries to buy more weapons and arms during the upcoming period to achieve more revenue and to form a relations between different new countries. The conflicts will be heightened during the upcoming period because Trump is forming and entering into a lot of arms deals. He will seek to increase the U.S. sales, multiplying the numbers and figures. So I predict the decline of any efforts to solve the ongoing conflicts because the U.S. interest is the continuity of these conflicts to achieve more revenue and make the regional countries depend on the United States as the most powerful country in the world with the largest GDP. So now the Middle East or any countries in conflict will only depend on the United States of America. It is its best interest to continue the vicious cycle of conflict.
Mr. Sadler, how might shifts in US arms export policies impact relations with traditional allies and adversaries alike, keeping in mind President Donald Trump's inauguration speech when he actually mentioned that he would work on curbing the security spending and also try and avoid being part of conflicts the US doesn't need to be a part of?
strongly with the earlier characterization about the Trump administration and the self-serving nature of arms sales. Quite the contrary, it was lack of leadership and lack of providing the needed weapons of our allies, not just Israel, but other countries across the Middle East, the weapons and the needed know-how, the training to defend themselves, that provided a power vacuum and an opportunity that the Iranian regime in Tehran fully exploited through their proxies from Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and across Iraq and Syria to bring about last year and a half's violence. It was not profiteering by U.S. arms deals. And so where we are at right now is the potential to return to an invigorated Abraham Accords, which has brought more stability to the Middle East, and with Saudi Arabia potentially joining this. Again, this was one of the reasons that was theorized why Iran agitated for the attacks in October 7th of 2023. So I see very good opportunities for an invigorated alliances and partnerships beyond Israel, but certainly many more other countries in the Middle East that will put a damper on Iran's institution or agitation for violence across the region. Reports have been coming back out of Tehran that Iran has told or directed its proxies to avoid a direct confrontation or perceptions of seeking escalation with the U.S. right now. And one can read from the failures they've had the last year at the hands of the Israelis, certainly not from U.S. provisions of weapons, which only recently has been restored, that Iran is looking to tamp down, and that is because of invigorated leadership and alliances in the Middle East with the United States. The arms sales are one of the bedrocks to back that up.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Ashri, other than the spike of arms exports by the U.S., do you see a change in the global security dynamic, especially regarding rival powers such as Russia and China?
Absolutely, there is the rivals increasing. Now we can see that there are two sides in the world. The third is Russia. China is increasingly advancing. Sometimes they even are better than the U.S. The U.S. is now working to achieve military advancement overall. And consequently, as the world is divided into two, one is the Chinese, the Russian in Asia, and other is Western, represented in the United States, that will hasten the pace of conflict in the world and will rule out reaching any common grounds, as Russia and China on one side are in direct confrontation with the U.S., and the Russian-Ukrainian war is the best example of that, as Russia and China are facing the U.S. Now, the U.S. are strengthening alliances with a lot of countries around the world, which will increase the rivalry between both sides. And we will see that during the next month and years. And I think Trump is really hard to control, and he will seek new alliances by power, through threatening and through investment opportunities. He only thinks about the U.S. best interests and to bring back the glory of the U.S. Facing Russia and China. So we witness more and more tension and conflict and increasing arms sales and finding new clients, especially in the Middle East, in the light of all the conflicts that are going on in the region at the moment. They will buy arms to satisfy America and to achieve some sort of power in the region and to increase and worsen the conflict, as we have seen in the Russian-Ukrainian war, as well as the Israeli-Arab conflict.
Yes.
And we will witness more of that during the next 4 years.
Mr. Brant Sadler, the former Pentagon official, and Mr. Ashraf El-Ashri, the Lahram newspaper managing editor, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. And as we conclude today's discussion, highlighted how US arms exports fuel geopolitical tensions, shape alliances, and reflect a strategic agenda, intertwining defense spending with global power dynamics and prompting reflection on the future of international relations in this evolving landscape. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's episode of Think Tank. I'm Henny Seif. Thank you for joining us.